Hi, folks. Welcome back to another podcast episode for Building Your Permaculture Property. My name is Takota Coen. It has been over 7 months since the last podcast I did with Neil Spackman. And the reason for the long hiatus is that I've been working on some pretty exciting projects out in British Columbia, developing some 30,000 acre ranch and a couple other 160 acre properties out in the high desert here. But it's wintertime now, things have slowed down, and I'm super excited to get back into doing some podcasts. I've been getting lots of prods from people wondering when where the heck I've been for the last half year. And so it's been in the back of my mind to jump in and do some more. And just kind of out of it seemed like a great alignment. I'm co-teaching in Verge Permaculture's permaculture design course right now online, and we've got a Telegram channel that a lot of the existing students and past alumni are able to interact and stuff. And so there's lots of back and forth that I take part with some students there, and I think it was it a week or two ago. Tasha here reached out in a private message asking if I had time for a phone call, because she had some questions for me that she wanted to discuss that she felt weren't it wouldn't be the best thing to ask some of these questions in a kind of an open group setting. And she gave me a bit more background via Telegram, and a lot of the questions that she was asking were things that I've been really wanting to talk about on the podcast for quite some time now. And I've actually tried to get other kind of peers or other colleagues on to discuss some of these things, but nobody wants to talk about it because they're so it's kind of a dangerous thread to start pulling on some with some of these topics. And so anyways, Tash and I had a private phone call. What was it? Probably an hour or 2 hours, just about. And
yeah, it seems about right.
And I wish we would have recorded the whole thing, because I think it was a really, really great conversation. And anyways, after that, there was interest on there's our sides to try to recreate the conversation and as best we can, because both of us feel that there's value in not only discussing it ourselves, some of these questions, but also getting other people involved in some of these conversations. So I felt like it was kind of the stars have aligned, and it was a great place to reboot the podcast. And I think this is your first podcast,
very first
and YouTube video. So kudos to you, Tasha. I know it's some people get a bit nervous, but just pretend like it's just a conversation between you and me, and
I'll do my best.
It's awesome. So with that, and kind of leaving that story gap there, why don't you start off, Tasha, by just kind of where our initial conversation began with some of the questions that you were asking, and why you wanted to have it privately at first.
Okay, well, I want to start by saying thank you for letting me do the podcast with you. This is great. I'm looking forward to it, and hopefully we don't ruffle too many feathers, or maybe we should. Who knows?
No, we definitely should. Yeah.
So I think the original question I had was whether or not you'd had to cull any of your farm animals before, because I was struggling with a very similar situation. What had happened is our city had briefly passed an ordinance that allowed backyard chickens. So we got chickens during that time. And then later, an anonymous group filed a lawsuit against the city for the ordinance, claiming that a environmental impact study had not been done. And not wanting to fight the lawsuit, which probably would have cost, possibly hundreds of thousands of dollars, the city chose to rescind the previous ordinance. And so then we had illegal backyard chickens, which was going great until we had some neighbors move out and other neighbors move in. And then, people called and made a complaint. And I think that was back in October. And we've been sort of like trying to dance around, well, can we try this? What about emotional support chickens? If the kids got involved in 4-H, would that work? Like, how can we serve our interests while not being in conflict with the city? And after a couple months of fighting it, just in early January here, we ended up having to cull the entire flock of chickens. We had given some of them away, but the ones that we had left were like the quiet ones, and then we were still getting complaints. So we had to cull all of them. We couldn't find another place for them. And I was just having difficulty with that. And so you talked to me about some of your own experience, and I was hoping that we could go through that too.
Absolutely. And so just for background definitions for folks who aren't familiar, culling is a term that basically means to kill or to get rid of animals. And so, when in the initial text message that you sent me, the first place that my mind went to was a lot of other conversations that I had around, the ethics of eating animals and that whole conversation, which I think I've talked quite a bit about. I'm not necessarily on this podcast, but I've got quite a few other YouTube videos that I've kind of dove into a bit of my philosophy on why. Basically, there's three main arguments against eating animals. The first one is it's ethical. It's unethical. It's immoral to basically for something else to die so that you can live. The second argument is that it is unhealthy for you and that it causes various health problems. And the third is that it's bad for the environment. I've a lot of the work that I do, with especially in the permaculture design course, which I'm teaching this afternoon, on this very topic. It's about animals. In my opinion, I destroy these three kind of arguments against animals. So I'm not going to dive into that piece there, but that was initially where my mind went, was that, so this is going to be a conversation about, the ethics of, or, is it okay that we eat animals, and dealing with that whole, because it's a very, it's one thing to, to buy meat on at a grocery store, and it's a completely other thing to be the person that takes the animal's life.
Well, and especially if it's an animal that you've cared for, you've nurtured it, and
Yeah, exactly. And so, that was initially where my mind went in terms of I was preparing myself for, okay, this is the conversation that we're gonna have. But what I was surprised is that, because I didn't know the whole background story of the city passing this law and then making it illegal, and basically forcing you to kill these animals, because that was basically can you explain a bit of the catch-22 that the city puts you in terms of, so they passed the law saying you could keep chickens, but only female chickens for laying eggs. But they also passed a law that it makes it illegal to kill animals in the city. Like you can't harvest your own animals, which, okay, sure. But then they passed a law making it illegal to have chickens in the city. And like you said, you did your absolute best to, try to give these chickens away, but who else, nobody else can have chickens in the city now. And so now there's all these animals that people had bought legally, with the kind of blessing of the government. And now there's literally no way that you can get rid of them legally. And to keep them, you're a criminal. You can't sell them because that would make somebody else a criminal in the city. And so it's like, you're like, what do you do? It's a catch-22. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't. And once I heard that piece of the story, because I was preparing myself for, conversation around, basically ethics and in my particular philosophy around, animal husbandry and stuff like that. And I shared a couple Wendell Berry quotes and a poem and stuff. And that for me really captures kind of that piece. But with that last piece of information, I realized, okay, this is a conversation about politics, and even like philosophy, and so it really kind of spiraled out from there about just these are the kinds of things that really makes my blood boil, and it's in my mind, it's a great example of, it's a very simple one, but it's symbolic of the larger problems that we're in right now as a global civilization, with regards to the relationship between governments and people, and of course our overall philosophy as a species. And so with that, we kind of dove into some of those topics, and like, what is the proper role of government, and how do you know this, like, what are the justifications for it? And so I know you prepared kind of a bunch of questions that were essentially what you had asked kind of as we were going through that. But is that a good place, kind of landing place to take off, or do we need
Yeah,
more
sure. I mean,
info?
Yeah, it was definitely a catch-22. And I mean, I think we knew we had to get rid of the chickens.
Yeah.
And it seemed like we were left with no other options but to kill them. But then we subsequently found out that it was illegal to kill them. So then we were concerned about, like, what are the ramifications of, of somebody finding out? So then we were like, how do we position ourselves so that the neighbors can't see us? And then that put us in this situation where we had to kind of do it in view of the chickens. And that was really rough on everybody. And that was, I think that was one of the things that was causing some of those feelings.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think what really helped me sort of work through that was that you told me a lot about what happened on your farm with having to send animals to a slaughterhouse if they're going to be sold to customers, but not if you're slaughtering it for your own personal use, which makes no sense at all. I mean, if it's safe for you, then how come it isn't safe for everybody else, And so I think I've heard you talk about it briefly before, but I got a lot more detail during our recent conversation. So can you tell that story again? I think that's a good one for people to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, part of why, my I was really excited to do this podcast, because it is this, I basically had a very similar thing happened to me a few years ago, and I've written several blogs on my website. Folks want to read them. It's coenfarm.ca, and I even show some of the documentation, and I've got videos and stuff to go along with that. But essentially, what happened is, when I went through the whole kind of ethical, dilemma, or as Michael Pollan calls it, the Omnivore's dilemma, around eating meat when I was kind of in my early 20s. And I basically had a midlife crisis when I was 20, and became a vegetarian or a vegan for a year. And I tell the story in my book about how I went around just shaming everybody around me into making them feel guilty for eating meat. And I was just super self-righteous and just kind of an asshole. Been
there.
Yeah. And basically, the main contradiction, and this dives into a bit of the philosophy, is is, so why is it ethical for a a lion or a cheetah or something like that? Why is it okay for them to eat a gazelle and to strangle it to death, but it's not ethical for humans to, if to do it properly, where there's no pain. You're using a stun gun or a rifle to so there's literally no pain, and
Right.
so that it's a contradiction. And really what that contradiction stems from is the belief that humans are not part of nature. And this goes back to, there's various branches, some of them religious, some of them agnostic or atheist, kind of cosmological stories about where humans come from and what our purpose is. But at the root of it, and we call it there's kind of three paradigms. There's the degenerative paradigm, which basically sees humans as separate from nature and above nature. So we're better than it. Everything is under our dominion. And or the sustainable paradigm believes that humans are separate from nature, but we're below it. Humans are a scourge on the earth. Mother Earth would be better off if we went somewhere else. But both of these ideas, that the thing they share in common is that there's something different about us that makes us either better or worse than nature, and it's total BS. And both of these narratives, one of them leads to just exploitation and feedlots and CAFOs and just the torture of animals that people have seen in movies like Earthlings and all this stuff, which is clearly wrong. But the flip side of it is one where, in an effort to stop that obviously, evil suffering that's being done to these animals, the flip side is to basically, try to pull humans away from the world and, protect it from us, which leads to, one of them will end in basically the collapse of civilization, because we'll have resource overshoot. And the other one will leave in mass altruistic suicide, because it's just, the world would be better off without us. And so if you're a truly good person, you'd take it to its logical conclusion and you'd shoot yourself. And if you were really good, you'd kill as many people as you could before you shot yourself, because and this is not you read the books and the manifestos of various serial killers and sociopaths, and they truly believe that humans were this wretched, awful species, this scourge on the earth. And if that's your logical conclusion, then you have no choice but to end it all. And so obviously these two worldviews, these two philosophies are they're two paths to the same cliff. And so this is where, from my perspective, we need to come at this from the regenerative paradigm, which is that humans are not separate and above or separate and below. We are nature. We have just as much a right to be here as the cheetahs and the lions and the beavers. And it's like, people marvel and they think it's great that beavers build dams and swallows build nests, and beehives have these geometrical hives, and isn't that so beautiful? But then when we look at the things that humans build, we build structures, we build houses, we build dams. That's wrong. And it's like
we build cathedrals, and we build art, and
all these things.
We build beautiful things as well.
Yeah. And
yeah, I think one of the illustrations in the book, Building Your Permaculture Property, that really sort of drove that home for me was you had like two triangles, and one of them was, here's nature, and then here's man above it, and then here's nature. I can't do an upside down triangle like this. No. And then man below it, and that's the sustainable paradigm. So degenerative is man on top, sustainable is man on bottom. And then regenerative is, here's a circle. And we're like right in the middle with everybody, all the other creatures in nature and microbes and plants and the whole bit. We are part of it. I thought that was a really good illustrate, like it gave the picture of what it means to be in the regenerative paradigm.
And totally. And so this is once I kind of got over that realization, well, then it the ethical dilemma becomes not, and the other just piece that all these, the vegans and vegetarians miss is that, like, okay, so where do you draw the line at sentient life? Because like there's clear evidence that plants can communicate, they have memories, they show self-preservation behavior,
even familial relationships.
Yeah, familiar, like so, yeah. So is it plants? Is it microbes? Like what's okay to eat and what isn't okay to eat? And so it leads to this whole, and again, it's from this, oh, well, humans, they're in a separate camp. It's okay for all these guys to eat and kill and strangle each other, but we can't, and we can only have, so it just doesn't make any sense. And it if you really try to practice it logically, it's impossible. And so this is what I found, like when I tried to live that way in this kind of like, do no harm type philosophy, I found that like it's not like every time you sneeze, every time you take a breath in, every step, you're killing billions of organisms, and you wash your hand, like this, it's impossible. And so the distinction becomes not what you eat but how you eat, and so there's a difference between death and suffering. Death feeds life and life feeds death, but needless suffering or suffering for suffering's sake, like that is, if there is evil in the world, that's it. It is the putting animals in some of these conditions, in these feedlots, and where they are forced to live in their own excrement and just horrible conditions. Clearly that's immoral because they're suffering, and there are other ways to raise animals. Oh, go ahead.
Much better, yeah. And we've known how to do it for a while. Yeah. My grandparents were ranchers back in the 50s, 60s, I think even up into the 70s. And my grandpa has passed on, but I was recently talking to my grandma and describing what a CAFO is to her. And she said, oh yeah, they started to have those coming in when we were leaving ranching. And I mean, if it's not a crime, it should be. It's a crime against humanity. It's a crime against nature. It's just wrong.
Yeah.
That was her, somebody who had spent decades caring for animals. And then, they did slaughter their own cows. And, my grandpa would say, we'll bring in the cow that we're going to, send to freezer camp. And then, we'll feed her, oats and like some of her favorite foods and get her in a really good, happy mood. And then, she's never seen a rifle before. Uh-huh. And you just kind of, gently and calmly approach her and then you shoot her and that's it. And she did, it's one instant you're alive and you're enjoying life. And then the next instant you're gone. And, you had talked about that in the context of getting that law changed, like having your animal have one bad day or even one bad moment versus sending them in a truck where they're going to be stressed out and they've never been in this situation before and they don't know what's happening. And then they go to a slaughterhouse where there's like the smell of fear in the air and, it's a terrifying situation. And then they get killed and like the effect that has on the quality of the meat. And then I really do want to talk about what you had to do to get that law changed. I think it's a really inspiring story.
Absolutely. So just going back a few steps there, just to kind of to build kind of the argument of what I'm moving towards. So it's clear that like there's no ethical argument that can be made for not eating meat, in terms of whether it's good for our health and good for the environment. Again, these have been widely debunked, and I've got lots of videos that I talk about how. The first one, good for our health, research West and A. Price. And the second argument that disproves the whole animals are bad for the environment is that prior to European colonization of North America, there were more, buffalo and bighorn sheep and deer and antelope than there are, cows and pigs and chickens and sheep in today. So, and if you read the reports of some of these early settlers, North America was just an ecological paradise. So it's a complete non sequitur to say that animals are bad for the environment because they have been here. So it's as one of my I can't remember who said it. Maybe it was Judah Schwartz. But she said it's not the cow, it's the how.
Mm.
Have a thing, right?
Well, and I think she spent a lot of time with Alan Savory too. So that's another.
Yeah.
He'd be a great interview for your podcast.
I've tried to get him on. He was kind of open to it. I just about got his daughter, who's doing some amazing work. But that was back quite a few months ago too. Okay, so that kind of takes care of the whole, like, basically there's nothing wrong with animals. It can be done properly, and they absolutely are essential for our health. So then we go, okay, so if we are going to, raise animals and keep them, what's the best way to do it? And this is kind of the point that I got to. And this is, you mentioned the saying that a lot of farmers have, or I've heard a lot of farmers say, is that, their whole approach to the how to raise animals in an ethical way is, they say, my animals only have one bad day. And what they mean by that is, if you raise animals, is basically, you care for these animals from birth to the point where they're ready to harvest. And, you do everything possible to make sure that they're happy and healthy and content. And then on the last day, you basically betray the whole thing and have to, force function them to do something. And they have a bad day, and it's a really shitty day for these animals. And if you spend time around animals, you can see that they're stressed. If you have to load an animal into a trailer and drive it down the highway to take it to a provincially or federally inspected plant, which in Alberta and in most places in the world, that's the only way you can legally sell meat to other people. Your animals have to have at least one bad day. And I thought, like, this is complete bullshit. Like, it's not necessary. What is the justification for these meat inspection plants and all these laws? So I kind of dove into, in Alberta, because we had always butchered our own meat. We'd always harvested our own animal on our farm, because that's the flip side, is like, one, you have to like load these animals into a strange trailer, drive them down the highway, take them to a strange place where they're around other animals, other people. Usually you leave them there overnight, and it's like, or they, like you said, they come for some oats one day and that's it. And in my mind, like, that's how we always harvested our animals, the way that we, on our farm for ourselves. But when I came back to the farm and I wanted to scale up, meat production and start doing direct marketing, I was forced, by the law, to do something that I knew was unethical and actually also unhealthy, because, I told the story before, is, anybody who's ever hunted for deer or moose or elk or anything like that, that if you're stalking the animal and they're grazing, everything is nice and quiet, and you get a shot and the animal drops, the meat will be really good. If you hit the shot and last minute it moves or something like that, or you don't hit it, it's not a clean kill and the animal runs, at least in my area, they call those sausage deer, because the meat will be so filled with fear hormones and adrenaline and cortisol, that the meat is so tough and so rank that the only way you can consume it is to just basically put a bunch of ketchup or spices and cheese, cheddar cheese stuff on it to make it edible, because it tastes awful. Now, the same thing happens, and Temple Grandin and other people have done research on how, when animals are stressed, it literally changes the chemical nature of the meat. It changes its color, changes its nutrient profile. And I mean, you're eating these stress hormones. And so that's going to have an effect on your mental state, not to mention your physical health state. So like, it's bad for the animals. It's bad for us. And so, why is this? Why are people doing this? And every farmer that I had talked to about, they all see the same thing. You know, they all know that, you know, to force our animals to have these bad days it's not necessary. It's not ethical, but you have to do it anyways. But I also know every farmer that I know, they always harvest their own meat themselves because they know that it's better. And so, you know, when I first came back to the farm, I didn't want to break the law, and so I was doing everything by the books. But what we found is we were getting a ton of complaints from our customers about, you know, the quality of meat. Like, you know, it would either be like, this is the best beef we've ever had, or like if you know, they would say things like, something just isn't right. Like, it just, like, the roasts were tough, or and with domesticated animals, their fight or flight response has been basically, you know, bred out of them for thousands of years. So they don't have strong of responses as you know, wild animals do, but it's still there. And so, you know, and looking at this research from, you know, Temple Grandin and other folks, I saw that this is obviously the cause of it. This is why I'm not able to give, you know, our customers the most nutrient dense meat possible, and then something that I truly feel good about, where the animals don't have any bad days. Like, this is an ideal situation. And so basically what I did is I looked, it's like, okay, if it's perfectly legal for myself as a landowner and as a farmer for me to harvest my own animal on my farm, send it away to a butcher shop, and then it comes back and it's, you know, like a provincially inspected butcher, you know, stamps it and it says, you know, uninspected, not for sale, I can feed that to my family. So, like, that makes no sense. If this is truly dangerous, why are you letting farmers take their own lives into their own hand? But you're not letting consenting consumers who are educated make the same choice. It's not fair. There's a contradiction there. And this is also,
well, it also makes no sense. It's ridiculous.
No, and it's the same argument for raw milk. You know, at least in the States, in most of the states, you're allowed to buy raw milk in the grocery stores, but in Canada you can't, because you're in you can buy raw milk in California, right?
You can in California, and there are some other states where you can buy it in the store, but there's actually, I want to say, only about 20% of the states where you can buy it in store. There are other states where you can buy it on the farm direct from the producer. Yeah. And so then, I mean, there the milk is going through fewer hoops to get to you, you know, fewer safety checks and stuff like that. And then there are other states where it's prohibited completely, just like where you live, probably.
Yeah.
Where you can have your own, you can have a cow yourself, and, you know, or, I mean, cows need a herd, right?
Yeah.
So you can have cows, but like who among us has, you know, most people live in cities. You're not going to have enough land to have multiple cows and, you know, have a milking rotation. And it just seems like, it's not feasible for most people, and having it not be legal to have access to that really nutrient dense food is totally counterintuitive.
Yeah. And so it's the same thing in Canada. Like, it's legal for me to, or the government won't stop me if I want to feed raw milk to my children, or I don't have kids, but my sister's kids or my family. That's totally fine. But as soon as I want, it's illegal to transport raw milk. I need a waste permit in Canada to even have it in a vehicle, which is ridiculous. If you look at, like, the, you know, Health Canada website, it talks about how basically raw milk is this super dangerous, you know, toxin that will kill you. And then you go across the board. I've bought raw milk in Arizona out of a grocery store. You can buy it in vending machines in Europe. So it's like, this clearly doesn't make sense. So, like, what's going on here? So when I started asking all these questions, I thought, like, this is clearly wrong on many levels. And as I've done more work into it, I've been able to better understand what exactly was wrong about it. And the main thing is, like, do we actually own our lives? Like, do we actually have sovereignty? Because to have sovereignty, you have to have the right to take your own risks. even if it is something dangerous, you have to be free to do it, so long as it doesn't harm anybody else, or so long as other people consent, they understand the risks and they consent to entering into agreement with you. And if you don't have a society where that is possible, you live in a dictatorship. You live on the spectrum of tyranny. So this is we don't have sovereignty over our own lives. We don't have sovereignty over our own land. And this kind of, we're moving into the kind of politics stuff, which I'll leave that there, and I'll come back just to finish off the story and kind of what we did. But I saw that this was an infringement of human rights. It's an infringement of morality, and I believe that it was a true case for civil disobedience, which is, when a citizen believes that the rules that the rules of the society that they live in are wrong, it is not only permissible, but it is essential that you break those laws, but that you break them with the knowledge, and the intention that if you're caught, you'll take it all the way to the top, and that you will use it as an example to get the laws changed. So it's not, being sneaky and trying to break the law. It is knowing with full confidence that this law is wrong, and I am going to use this as an example to change the system to what is right. Yeah. And so that's what we said.
I think that's kind of where I got tripped up. Like I said, we were trying to hide from the neighbors so nobody could see that we were doing something that was illegal.
Yeah.
When in fact, the way the city had set things up, it was legal and it was not. And I know, you can't kill animals on your property. And,
yeah.
There are lots of situations where killing an animal on your property might not be the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are situations where it might be the right thing to do. But I think one thing that I found really helpful for bringing that into focus for me was when you talked about that analogy with, training an elephant, and using fear versus guilt. Yeah. And, you try to train an elephant with fear, fear of beatings or violence or, lack of food or just some kind of torture for the animal, essentially, versus making the animal feel as though they deserve it.
Yeah.
And, we really briefly touched on that, but I think that deserves some more attention, because that's where we get into this place psychologically where we think I'm doing something that's wrong, even though in another part of your mind you think this isn't really wrong. This is what I should be doing.
Yeah.
And that was the way it was for me actually keeping the chickens, and I didn't have as much of a problem with that. But then also I think I was really upset too, because they were just barely a year old. They still had a lot of useful life left in them. They were laying really well. And we didn't even get to see them go through the full process of what does a molt look like? We saw a couple chickens go through that. And then it was really frustrating too when we were culling them and we could see they had such healthy organs, because, we thought if we're killing these animals, we better be sure that we're keeping as much nutrient on this property as we can. Uh-huh. So we're going to save those organs because they're too small to really do anything with for cooking, and, use them to provide nutrient for new plantings. Uh-huh. So, that's how we got to see the organs. I don't want to get too grotesque or anything like that, but they had gorgeous livers and beautiful hearts, and they were just perfect, and having to destroy an animal like that because the law says you have to, but then also the law says that you can't. It's, it was just such a,
totally
crazy situation.
Absolutely. And so that all the emotions that you were feeling and the same thing. So I'll jump back to my story and then we'll kind of bring them together here. So with the with that in mind of knowing that I wanted to create a situation where I could truly raise animals in an ethical way. The laws were wrong. It's not ethical. All that stuff. I decided that, okay, well, the law says that it's fine for me as a producer to harvest animals on my land and consume that myself. So I'm going to turn my customers into producers. I'm going to rent them land. I'm going to sell them a live animal, and I'm going to charge them a fee for raising their animal on their land. And then I'm going to charge a coordination fee to hire a butcher to come and butcher their animal on their land. And I had all these contracts, and it was a nightmare. Like my invoices were like essays of like, contracts of like, here's this cost of this, because I literally wanted to lay it all out. But I was like, okay, so this is the law. I'm gonna follow the law to the T. And anyways, it worked fantastic. I explained this to all of my customers. By the way, it was very difficult to try to market meat like this, because I basically had to have a 3-hour conversation with every customer. It's like, hey, I'd like to buy a pound of ground meat. And it's like, okay, well, before I can sell you that, $10 pound of ground meat, let's have a 3-hour conversation about philosophy and ethics and the proper role of government. And then here, sign this contract that basically says you're going to buy. Like, it was very difficult.
Yeah, I'm wondering how many people were just like, click.
But so that's
all
the
I
funny,
want is some ground beef.
that's the funny thing, is that I think like almost every person that I ever talked to, when they heard the whole thing, they're like, I'm in. Like, I want to buy from you. Unless they had some other like limitation, like I can't take a whole animal or a half animal or whatever. But like everybody got it. It's like this makes sense. I've never heard any objections to this. And so, anyways, this is what we did, and we did it for 3 years. We found this amazing butcher who would come out to our farm. He would be able to harvest the animals out in the field. There's no stress. I've got, I have pictures of it all. They're actually on my website. In the blog, it shows the whole thing. It's like, it was the most beautiful thing ever. We had customers come out to actually see their animal getting harvested. It was an amazing experience to take part in, and it was awesome. I think we did this for 3 or 4 years. We found that we had in that time we had 0 complaints about tough steaks or tough roasts or poor quality meat. So the quality went up. Everything was amazing. We were able to just like you, take the waste products which were previously dumped, like the skins and the stomachs and the kind of other bits. We were able to compost those, add those back to the field. It all made sense. And but after 3 years of this kind of amazing honeymoon period, one morning in I think it was June, we had a black SUV with government logos pull up to the yard, and we were sitting on the deck having breakfast. And actually, I was in the house in a meeting, and my mom comes, run up the stairs, basically, in tears, saying, "There's a government agent here that wants to talk to you." And so I came downstairs and I had a conversation, and he had somehow found his way into like the kind of back end of our website, which I had like passwords and stuff to like protect, because I wanted to make it simple for people to sign these contracts, so that, because like most people don't have time to sign and scan all this stuff. So I was trying to make it as simple as possible. It's like this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. Do you agree? Put your name in. They had somehow found this on our website. I don't know if somebody, I do not think anybody reported us. I think the government was, doing searches or something on the internet, and they somehow found their way into our website. But they were old pictures, like screenshots of our website, which were like several years old. So they'd obviously been watching us for a couple of years. And anyways, he came and he said, "Is this your website?" And I said, "Yes, that's my website." And he said, "Okay, well, you do know that you're breaking, what the meat inspection law." And I said, "No, I'm not." And I pulled out my binder of all my receipts, and I said, "I'm not. Show me where I'm breaking the law." And he smiled, and he said, "Really, you're not. Like if it were up to me, I'd let you do this, but." And we sat him down at the kitchen table, and he was there for probably an hour. And I didn't lie about anything. I told him exactly what we were doing. I showed him all the receipts, all the contracts, and he thought this makes sense to me. However, basically, if you try to fight this in court, like basically he said, like his agency wanted to pursue it. and that if I didn't cease and desist, and they sent me a letter afterwards saying if I didn't cease and desist, they would it's the consequences would be a $10,000 fine and or a year in prison, were the threats. And so, and he told me this to my face. I said, I'm not breaking the law. Show me where I'm breaking the law. Like I said, I will take this to court. And he said, well, you can, but basically, like, we're like, do you want to spend 10 years in court? Like you might win, but it'll suck, basically, is what he was saying. It was complete blackmail. This is a government agent saying, I'm just doing, he literally said to me, I think what you're doing is okay, but I'm just I'm just following orders. The same, scapegoat that every, goose stepping government agent in history has ever used to justify the things they know are evil. So I was ready to fight it, and I was like, yeah, like we're going to the top. But then they went to my butcher, and because of the way that the butcher shops are regulated, this particular butcher was having to falsify documents to hide kind of what we were doing, and so he didn't have as airtight of a case, and so they basically threatened to shut him down. And there was no way I could fight it because like I knew that I was right. I knew there was nothing wrong with it, but no butcher in the province would ever work with me because they would just go after me. And so it's the same thing with you. It's like, we'll get you somehow. Anyway, so we had to stop. And for 2 years, I went through a depression. I was, for months, I was in a funk, and just this rage of feeling like this catch-22. It's like, this is wrong. Everybody knows it's wrong. The government, like the government agent knows it's wrong, but it's still marching on. So what is the driving force behind this? Fast forward a couple of years, I was able to, there was some form or a request from the government for, basically it was Jason Kenney was our premier at the time, and he said he had this website that was like, cut red tape, submit your application for what laws you would like to see changed. One of my customers sent this to me, and so I had like several thousand people submit. The law that they wanted changed was this Meat Inspection Regulation Act, and I literally wrote the new conditions for how I wanted the act to read that would basically make it illegal for what we were doing. I made my justifications. I sent it out to my newsletter list. I sent it to all my farmers who also feel the same way. They had all their customers put it in, and we literally flooded this government office with all these basically requests to cut this red tape because it was just senseless. And I never actually had a chance to go into any of the meetings that the meat inspection regulation folks had, but a couple of my friends who are like my butcher and the abattoir, the mobile harvesting guy that I had, they were in the meetings, and they basically said like the reason the law got changed was because of that letter writing campaign. And my name is still on a blacklist somewhere in the government office for doing this. Anyway, so long story short, the law was changed. Now we're doing exactly what we were doing before, but it's legal. There's still some useless red tape, and you got to submit some forms. It's just a complete waste of time. But we're doing it, and it's awesome, and I feel great about it. But how this kind of connects into your story is at the time, I felt the same things that you're feeling. I felt depressed, and like confused and partly guilty, and it was just all these different things. And the story you were alluding to, or the analogy I shared, which was that the only way that this system works is, like, for example, the government agent, coming and saying, like, I know what you're doing is okay, but I'm just following orders, and we just kind of got to do it. Is so that is what's called a moral sanction, and what that means is the analogy for training the elephant is, if you are trying to make someone or something your slave, there's several ways you can do it. One of them is you can use fear, basically do what I say or else. But the problem with that is you can never turn your back. If you bend over once and you're not watching the elephant or your human slave or whatever it is, they're going to get you, because
that was a constant source of fear in the South when slavery was legal there. Yeah,
exactly. And so you can't just use fear. And so you have to get the slave or the thing that you're trying to enslave to feel like it deserves to be enslaved. And that's what's called a moral sanction. And it is the only thing that keeps this behemoth of a government. Like, you talk to anybody, whether on the political spectrum, whether you're the most left wing, pink-haired, liberal arts college student, or you're a diehard, Republican or a conservative, or you're Trump, or you're like the girl with pink hair screaming in the streets. Like, no matter who you are on the spectrum, there is something that anybody on that spectrum says, oh man, I just drives me nuts that the government's able to do this. It just drives me nuts. Like, there's nobody is in agreement. Like the government is all good and everything should stay the same. Everybody sees like there's obviously problems. We need to fix it.
Yeah.
And so but we go along with these laws, even though we know that they're wrong, because there's this in the back of our mind. Yeah, there's the threat of being put in jail, and that's one thing. But most of all, it is, it's like the saying, "Let he who's without sin cast the first stone." And that's not like my interpretation of that analogy from the Bible is not a very charitable one. And I actually believe that teaching was, or at least the interpretation that I'm putting on it is wrong, because what it's saying is like, if you feel guilty about anything, you won't cast judgment on evil when you see it. You won't cast the first stone. And so this is part of the whole kind of machinery of state, is to create all of these laws and regulations and red tape so that nobody in the society feels like they can cast the first stone. It's the traffic tickets, it's basically everybody's guilty. And so there's no point in talking about, like, you can't point fingers at somebody else because who are you to talk, kind of a thing. At least this is how I see the machinery of state working and continuing to perpetuate itself. And so one of the things that I encourage you to do was to do some research into ethics and philosophy, and truly understand what is the right thing to do. And once you understand what is the right thing to do, you can't be controlled with guilt anymore. And because if you have done something wrong, then you make amends for it, and you take responsibility and you fix it. But if you haven't done something wrong, like, you don't take on the kind of intergenerational guilt, or guilt by association, or whatever else it is that is constantly being thrust on us. And yeah, so that I know that. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say I'm going to go a little bit off the reservation here, or at least off the notes that I had made.
Sure.
And just make an observation that, like, it seems like there's a spectrum of willingness to break the law, and like how you make those decisions about what is and isn't right. Like, in the very beginning of this conversation, we talked about how, like, some serial killers were environmental activists, and they truly believed that humans were, the cause of all the problems in the world. Yeah. And that humans no longer deserve to exist, and they were fine sacrificing their own life because they knew they would eventually get caught. And but in the meantime, they had to take as many humans with them as they could.
Yeah.
And so that's, to me at least, that feels very wrong.
Yeah.
And then there's the other side of the spectrum where like you're engaging in civil disobedience because you know that the law is wrong. So like, I guess my question is like, where do you find yourself on that spectrum so that you know you're not a serial killer?
Excellent,
versus
excellent
somebody
question.
who's moving, you know,
Yeah.
the ball forward in terms of making laws that make sense for
Yeah.
everybody. And
Yeah.
I mean, should civil disobedience feel okay? Should it feel like really uncomfortable? Like, oh no, I'm breaking the law and I got to weigh, you know, my complete discomfort with this law that I know is silly and wrong versus what might happen to me if I, you know, engage in this civil disobedience that I'm considering. Like, is it that kind of situation? Should it feel uncomfortable, or should it be like, I absolutely know that I'm right? I'm just trying to figure out like how you gauge whether or not you actually are doing the right thing.
Excellent question. And so there's an answer to this. And this is not a lot of the things that I'm saying today have been informed through my research into one particular philosopher who, in my opinion, is one of the most important thinkers, you know, in history, and she's Ayn Rand. You know, she wrote Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead and Anthem were kind of her
The Virtue of Selfishness.
Yeah. So those were kind of common fiction books, but she also wrote a lot of nonfiction essays about taking situations like this, you know, basically like a real situation in culture, and then analyzing it from a philosophical perspective, you know, from ethics and what is right and what is the good, and kind of lays it out. And so this is where, if folks are interested in the what we're talking about, I highly encourage you to not only read her fiction works, which I think are incredibly inspirational and just wonderful, but read her nonfiction, read her essays, like you said, The Virtue of Selfishness, Philosophy, Who Needs It, Capitalism, The Unknown Ideal, you know, The Return of the Primitive. These are kind of anthologies of essays that she's written since, you know, basically from the 50s to the 80s when she died, that were just unbelievable. And so I say that for people for the research, but now I'm going to kind of put my own spin on it. And also, full disclosure, there are a few things that I disagree with Rand on, but the points right, because Ayn Rand is like, she pissed everybody off. she pissed the conservatives, the liberals, the atheists, the theists. She pissed everybody off because she, in my opinion, she had a consistent set of principles that she applied to the world, and you know, she didn't let, you know, pre-existing ideas around something else, you know, dogmas to infringe on that. Where I disagree with her is I believe that, you know, because most of her writing was done in the 50s and 60s and 70s, a lot of the evidence that she used to kind of base her principles on, she had some missing information basically that she couldn't have known, but the principles she came up with are very good, but some of her application of those principles when she's talking about situations like this were imperfect because she was missing some stuff. So that's my kind of side note on Rand. But coming back to this question,
that's how she comes off seeming like a jerk instead of a brilliant philosopher.
Yeah, and so this is the funny thing is at least to my knowledge, I've never heard anybody give a valid critique of Rand. The only critiques are ad hominem attacks. Oh, she's a jerk. Oh, you know, she had an affair. She died on the, you know, on welfare. All of them are just either lies or simplifications of her actual life. Nobody engages with her ideas. They attack her character, which is like, I don't care. Like, Hitler was an awful guy. I'm sure he had at least one or two good ideas. Like that, like you have to be able to separate the person or the character from the principles. And so I don't care if Rand was a jerk. Her ideas are brilliant. I don't think she was a jerk. I just think she she wasn't willing to pander to people's dogmas, and so she came off as arrogant or aggressive. But anyways, that's we could do a whole other podcast about my infatuation with
Seems
Ayn
like it.
Rand. But coming back to your question of how do we know what is the good? Like how do we know that?
It seems like a really consequential question.
It is. It's very important. And so the way that Rand answers that question is quite simple. And other she's not the only one. Other philosophers have similar versions of this law. I mean, it's essentially the golden rule, or the silver rule, however you want to put it. But it's essentially you can't be a hypocrite. So you can't say, well, this is what's good in this situation, but in the exact opposite situation, it wouldn't be good. So I think that all humans are bad, and so I'm going to go kill all humans. And say, okay, why not start with yourself? Why?
Well, okay, playing devil's advocate, I can't do the work that I'm supposed to do in taking out as many humans as possible if if I'm dead.
Sure, but
and there's arguments against that too. Like, well, can't you just set something up so it happens without automatically, and then I think people have done that too.
I'm sure they have.
This conversation is going to
this is getting in, but these are, in my opinion, these are very important conversations, because if you don't know what is the good, and if you can't make it a delineation, what is it about the Joker type person who wants to destroy the world for the sake of destroying the world, versus the conversation that we're trying to have, which is how do we create the best situation for all parties involved. And so a better analogy is okay, so look at the justification for for slavery, or for the one of the core principles in objectivism, which is Ayn Rand's philosophy, is the principle of non-aggression. So basically, it is immoral to initiate force against someone else. And so, okay, why is it immoral to initiate force against somebody else? Because if it's okay for you to initiate force, why isn't it okay for somebody else to initiate force?
It's right? Kind of a version of the golden rule.
It's a version of the golden rule, or other people call it the principle of voluntarism, or another way Rand puts it is mutual consent to mutual benefit. That's the goal: mutual consent to mutual benefit. And that statement, mutual consent to mutual benefit, for me, that's what captures permaculture and animal husbandry. It is applying that principle to beyond the human sphere, and realizing that in the same reason that it's immoral to initiate force against a human because you wouldn't want it done to you, and you can't have your cake and eat it too. It's a contradiction. And by allowing yourself to initiate force and creating some loophole, you yourself build into that action your own future destruction, because now when somebody with a bigger stick or a bigger gun or a bigger mob decides that they're going to take your shit, you have no justification to, well, you can't do that, that's wrong. Well, why? Well, because it's my shit. Well, you took their. So the only way is to have a core principle of voluntarism, mutual consent to mutual benefit. Now, where I really think that Rand missed out is that she again, humans are separate from nature. These principles only apply to humans. To hell with everything else, and basically we have all the rights to destroy them.
So she was in the degenerative paradigm.
She was in the degenerative paradigm, and but she did a marvelous assassination of the sustainable paradigm in a way that I've never seen anybody else do. And so she's I'm not saying don't read her. The only thing we just need to extend that principle to all life. Right. And this is where my philosophy of permaculture and animal husbandry and all these integrated systems is that these organisms are voluntarily choosing to associate with us, or if their systems are right, they will.
vice versa, would you choose to be any
Yeah.
animal on your farm?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the thought experiment that I give. It's a version of kind of John Rawls, who's another philosopher, which I do not like his stuff, but he has an interesting thought experiment called the Veil of Ignorance, which really, in doing more research into his stuff, I'm not I don't like his stuff, but the thought experiment that I'm talking about is kind of built off of his work, but it's separate. So, anyways, in this thought experiment, you basically you're trying to figure out what is the good, and this is a way to apply principles in a way without getting yourself into contradictions. And so, if you're designing a farm, you basically put all the elements into the farm. So the animals, the structures, the plants, the people, you put all the kind of roles or functions in that system on pieces of paper, and you put them in a hat. And then before you draw names to figure out, which element that you're going to be in that system, you have to try to create rules for the system where it's like, okay, so we're all here, we're all about to draw names. How are we going to set this game up so that no matter which name we pull out of the hat, we would willingly agree to take part in the game? And John Rawls uses a similar analogy but he uses it to justify self-sacrifice, and all. It's a whole mess. But in this situation, it is basically how do we design a system where all elements, not just humans, would agree to this mutual consent and mutual benefit. And that's what permaculture, in my opinion, is about. And it is possible. There's fantastic evidence that these animals that like cattle and pigs and chickens and sheep and goats that were domesticated supposedly domesticated 10,000 years ago, there's really good evidence that they weren't domesticated. They chose to associate themselves with humans.
So they kind of adopted the humans.
They adopted the humans. And there's several books, and like basically, I can't remember the name of the evolutionary theory, but it just makes sense like that. Like you can actually see that progression, and you can see how like some animals would choose.
And I not specifically with animals, but I believe Michael Pollan also discusses that in the Botany of Desire, like how plants have gotten us to do all these services for them so that they can have a continued existence. It's
mutual consent to mutual. It's the principle of interdependence applied. And so this is that's the goal. And the good, what makes it good is that everybody's participating voluntarily. And that you would yourself, if roles were reversed, you would be okay. Like, obviously I love being a human and I'm super happy, but when I put myself and I watch my animals, my pigs or my chickens, and I put myself in their position, when on my farm, I would no doubt rather be a pig or a chicken or a cow on my farm than a wild animal. There's absolutely no doubt, because you have all the benefits of the freedom to express and to scratch and to do the thing. You can just see the joy that these animals have
engaging in what would be their natural behavior.
But they have none of the downsides. They're not going to get strangled by a cheetah or a grizzly bear. They're not going to freeze to death in the winter. They're not going to go hungry. They're not going to go thirsty. You don't have to be constantly looking over their shoulder for, like, these animals have the ability, like, they are benefiting by our relationship with us. And if we are able to give them, a beautiful death at the end of their life as part of the relationship, it's a marriage. It's literally a marriage contract and an agreement, and I believe it's voluntary. But this is coming back to these laws, and where you had to kill your chickens, and you had to do it because you don't want your neighbors to see. You had to do it in front of them, and that caused needless stress. And so you intuitively feel that that's wrong, and it is. It's wrong because they shouldn't have had a bad day. There should have been a better way that you should have been able to do that. And this is not to pass judgment on you, because you were forced basically at the point of a gun to do something that you knew
with a limited time frame as well.
With a limited time frame, but that was the thing, is that they used fear. We are going to send agents to, we'll either fine you, and if you don't pay your fine, we'll imprison your. Violence is the threat. But worse than that, and this is the violence is one thing. It's the moral sanction. It's believing that these people have the right to put a gun to your head to force you to do something against your will that you believe is wrong. So in any time you have a situation, there's another kind of philosopher, writer named Larkin Rose, who writes his book called The Most Dangerous Superstition, which is it's his argument for why we need to move to an anarchistic type government where there is no government. I believe it's a bullshit argument.
Anarchy works in small groups where people have accountability to each other, but in a large context, I don't think that's such a good idea.
It doesn't work. However, in that book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, he raises a fantastic argument against the and I can't remember, did I give this analogy when we were talking? I don't think I did.
I don't think we got there.
Yeah. So this is another thought experiment where you can kind of take this principle of non-aggression and non-contradiction and apply it in a real life. So he basically, his whole book is just a series of asking these questions, which is, okay, so is it okay for you to initiate force against somebody? Like, is it okay for you to steal somebody's stuff? Like,
I mean, I would say, just like a lot of answers in permaculture, it depends. You know, my grandparents were raised during the Great Depression, and you know, my grandma's father would leave the door to the root cellar unlocked, because you know they had a farm and they had food.
Yeah.
And you know, my grandmother's mother, my great grandma, was, you know, we got to stop these people from stealing our food. And he said, these people are starving. They're starving. And, you know, we're not going to just open the doors wide and say, take all our food. But if they're going to steal our food, we're going to let that happen, you know.
At least they don't break the doors. So that's an interesting kind of a lifeboat scenario type thing. However, I would say there's there could have been other ways to achieve that end, because the danger in this is that again, this is the moral. If you give the moral sanction for these people to take your stuff, why stop at a few potatoes? Why not just take the whole farm? And this is where communism comes from, and the dictatorship of the proletariat, and why the Russian Revolution was the serfs rising up against. And there was other things in there, but there has to be some consistency in these principles. It is wrong to forcibly take somebody else's possessions without their permission. If you are in need, I believe the correct way that because it's the difference between theft and charity. It's like you can ask for assistance or you can take assistance, and I believe that one is wrong, the other is right. But assuming in a situation like this, these, like, even for this argument, like, people aren't starving, you know, they're just teenage kids or whatever. They decide that they want to. Like, is it wrong for somebody to break into somebody else's house and take something that isn't theirs? And the answer is
probably, in most circumstances, the answer is yes.
So I would argue in all situations it's yes.
In all situations.
In all situations it's yes. If you truly needed the help, you could ask. No, so extending it. Okay, so it's wrong for one person to take something without permission. What about if there's 2 or 3 people, and they decide and they want to take somebody else's stuff? Obviously, it's still wrong. In fact, it's even more wrong in a way, because it's more cowardly. Like, it's now there's like this group mentality. You know, 3 people trying to take one. So what if there's 100 people in a town, and you know the 99 people decide that, hey, there's this one guy, he's got a cow and we want his cow, and so we're all gonna, you know, vote that we should take his cow. Does that make it okay? No, it's still wrong. It's your so no matter whatever the numbers are in play, it's or what kind of elaborate systems you put into place. So taking the analogy further, you know, what if people form a corporation or a government or some other, you know, entity where their names are anonymous, nobody knows who it is. or they're voted, they have presidents and they have a constitution that says, okay, we hereby give ourselves the permission to, at certain times, if the need is necessary, to take somebody else's stuff. Does that make it okay? No.
Well, and that's sort of an analogy to taxation.
Yes, and so this is where I'm going with the analogy. You got there first. Is yes. What happens if, okay, we're not going to take all your stuff. We're just going to take half your stuff. Or okay, no, that's too much. 30%. Well, actually, we're going to vote in different parties. It's one party's going to only take 25%. The other party's going to take 33%. Which one's right? They're all wrong. And the reason it's wrong is because it is immoral to initiate force against somebody else. And so, like, if you are, and this, I know everybody's, well, what about the roads? How are we going to pay for public schools? All these BS arguments. It's like, if services are valuable, people will pay for them. I believe we should create a system where it's mutual consent to mutual benefit. And if somebody decides, I don't want to participate, I believe we should live in a society where that right to say no is the most sacred thing that you could ever imagine. Now that goes for that other person then can't benefit. It's like you can't have the benefit without the consent. It's like everybody wants rights, but nobody wants responsibilities. You can't have rights without responsibilities. And so that's another example of that application of creating a society where we've got mutual consent to mutual benefit. And you can see it on a farm scale in terms of, okay, that's how you run a proper farm. You can see it on a community scale, but like as soon as we start getting into global governments and states and countries, people tend to get a bit vague about it. But I believe that the same principles are at play there, and so what kind of bringing a lot of this stuff together. I believe that what we have now in all around the world in various degrees are these various versions of tyranny, where different groups of people in different elaborate schemes have written down on pieces of paper that certain people who are voted or elected or decided by God or whatever it is, that they have authority. This is the origin of the book. They have the myth of authority, that they have the right to do things that nobody else does. And so, they can hire people to take your stuff. They can put a badge on them and a fancy hat and outfit, and then it's okay because that's the police. But it is the initiation of force that makes it immoral. And so, but that same principle, for the same thing that makes the initiation of force wrong, it makes the use of counteractive force or of defending yourself with enough force to stop that initiation of force absolutely essential. Because if we live in a pacifist society where nobody wants to defend themselves because violence is bad, the first person who picks up a stick and go around hitting people becomes king and becomes a dictatorship. And so because it is immoral to initiate force, it is essential that we use force against those who initiate it. And this is why we need government, because the government is a third-party organization whose role is to be an objective arbiter of justice, of when is it okay to use counteractive force against people who break this sacred law. And so, according to the principles of Ayn Rand and objectivism, the only proper role of the government is the police, the military, and the courts, the legal system. And all of those things are there to protect mutual consent to mutual benefit. So if some people come into it, they make an agreement and they say, yep, I'm gonna do this, you're gonna do this, and if you do this, then I'll do this. Agreed, we sign. If somebody breaks that rule, they have initiated force. If they take products in exchange for future payment, but then the payment doesn't come, you have taken something from somebody else without their permission. You violated contract, and that's where we need to have some objective and clear pre-written agreement for, okay, if this happens, this is what will be done, and these are the people that will do it. Because if otherwise it just becomes into vigilante justice, like with anarchy, where we all go around shooting each other because it's up to anybody's whim. So we have to basically relinquish our right of self-defense to a third-party, unbiased organization, the government, and they will administer contracts. And if somebody breaks a contract, they will use the police to, detain that person, use the court system to objectively find, how the contract was violated, and if necessary, confiscate that other person's goods, or force some kind of remedy to honor that initial mutual consent to mutual benefit. And then the army is basically there for if some outside force outside of the country decides to come in and again, initiate force without our consent. And so this is, I've just taken that simple principle from, the farm scale level, and how, when you were forced to do something that you knew was wrong, you initiated force against your chickens in a way that wasn't consensual. It wasn't the right way to do it. You felt bad, and that's the proper human response to that. But you also felt anger because you were forced into do it because of all these other things. And what I was talking about with the sanction of the victim is that it is absolutely essential that you don't feel guilty for the situation. It is not you were not at fault here. You were nescient. You weren't ignorant. You were nescient. You didn't know. Science is to know. Is not. So nescience is to not know. Ignorance is to see but to ignore. And so in this situation, you didn't know any better. So no judgment or guilt can be ascribed. Because without free will or free choice, there can't be an attribution of blame. And that's absolutely essential. You don't feel guilty, because you need to retain your ability to throw stones when you see evil, when you see wrong. And so if you, I've made mistakes in life. I believe that I've made amends for all of the mistakes, and I've got a clean slate, and that is a huge part of my emotional well-being and my ability to without hesitation call a spade and say, this is wrong, this is why it's wrong, and this is what should be done about it. And so I think does that kind of capture the kind of the ending point of the conversation that we had on the phone?
The essence of our conversation. And of course, I have a million other questions that I could ask, and thought definitely. Experiments and everything. Like
definitely,
I just if we had that kind of regenerative mindset when Europeans came to this land, I don't think we would be in the same situation that we are now, having committed massive genocide against the native peoples here. And that's something that we all even still collectively feel kind of a sense of, wow, that was really wrong, and what do we do about it?
That's a great, and so this is another hot topic that I think is a great segue into this. Is so let's, if you've got time, I would love to dive into that piece of because there's a lot of conversation around reconciliation.
We've got a ways until class.
That's right. Yeah. So this is another example of, or it's a bit more complicated to apply that principle of non-aggression for basically how do you right wrongs that were done in the past. And so this is actually one of the topics that if people dive into Rand and they read particularly one of her books called the Return of the Primitive, there are essays in there that will make most people's skin crawl because of the things that she asserts. One of them, which I disagree with, and I will say why in a moment. One of them is that she believes that Europeans had every right to come in here and basically, she doesn't use the term rape and pillage, but basically to come in and to take the land from, she uses the term savages, from these savages, and basically create a fair and objective system, which she believes was, the U.S. Constitution was basically the closest document that, or the closest attempt to achieve a society of mutual consent to mutual benefit that was enshrined in law. She also says that the Constitution had some loopholes in it, which allowed for the growth of government to pass laws that would give itself authority to benefit itself and all these things. But it was a close attempt. And so she basically says, in this situation, the ends justify the means, kind of a thing where, because this was our goal, was to set up this kind of fair, mutual consent and mutual benefit, we could basically go in and steamroll whoever we wanted to get to that point. And she uses this, this is one of the most egregious things that I've ever read from her. However, I believe, and I'll use her own principles in a different way here to show how I think this should be applied in the future, and how to skirt around all of this. How do we, where do we draw the line in terms of historical land ownership? And, do we give it back to the Iroquois or the Comanches or the Blackfoot? Like who gets which section? Because the boundaries were, how do we decide? Same thing with a lot of the, the reparations for, for victims of slavery. That in the South, there's talk about, I believe, there's even talk of payments like several $100,000 for people of color whose ancestors were involved in the slavery. It gets really messy and arbitrary and anyway. So coming back to this analogy of like, so say you're trying to set up a situation of mutual consent and mutual benefit. Society like this, but there's somebody who says, well, I don't want to do that. I don't want to take part in your society. I think that, God said that I have the right to subject women to, make them cover their faces. I believe that God, the Bible said, or whatever said that it's okay to enslave the infidel and to make them do these things. So I don't want to participate. Like I think that's no thanks. And so Rand basically says, well, because those people, basically it's like, if you live by the sword, you die by the sword. Like if you're gonna try to initiate force or play that game of force, then we have the right to come in and steamroll you and basically, like in the Middle East or places like that, because they don't live in a society where humans, all people are equal. Like they don't get to benefit from the laws about how we govern. We can go in and do whatever we want. That's kind of her argument. I think it's a bullshit argument.
I mean, it seems like a necessity, if you're going to be thinking that way, that you have to define some group or some, subset of what we think of as nature as other. It's something other than what we are.
Yeah.
And so then you don't have to worry about changing places with it, because it's something else. That's something completely different. I am different than that thing. And that thing is different than me. And because I'm me, I'm the one that gets to have the benefits of the kind of life I want to live.
Yeah.
And the other is there to serve me. That's the essence of the degenerative paradigm.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but I'll give you another practical analogy for how I can, like, this is, if you're familiar with FGM, it's their female genital mutilation. Basically it's a practice that a lot of cultures, that are, over in the kind of in Africa and, the Middle East in places, they basically, use basically, and this is something, God said that you should basically cut off the clitoris of women and sew up their, vaginal openings so that, basically they can remain faithful, and that when they're sold or kind of given away to their husband, they can guarantee that they're pure and they're virgins. It's evil. This is one of the most atrocious violations of human rights. It's awful. And
Yeah.
so the argument is, because it's so evil, why not just go in there and just shoot every person who's practicing this thing and just be done with it, because it's so awful, and it's clearly wrong. And in some ways, I think Rand's arguments are basically, that's kind of what she's saying is if people are at this level of evil, they have no claim on protection or anything like that. And I don't necessarily disagree with her. Like there is need for justice, and again, this is the principle of, because it's wrong to initiate force, it is essential that we defend with force sufficient to stop that initiation. And so, because it's wrong to use female generation, we should do whatever necessary to stop it, because it's wrong. We must. However, this comes into just the practicality of human nature. And I don't have kids, but I think you mentioned that you do.
Yeah.
And I think most people are familiar with this. So if you take a small child, like a couple years old, and they're playing with something and it's dangerous, say they pick up a mouse trap or a knife. They don't know what it is, but they know they want to, it's theirs. And you go, oh my God. And you go and you take it away from the child. What do? They lose their mind. How dare you take, how dare you take away this thing that I wanted, even though it was probably going to kill them. They see it as, how dare you? And so, and if you do that enough, that child will resent you. Even though your intention was like, this is for your own good, this is wrong. And so, and this is kind of a different parenting style. There's another book I read called The World Until Yesteryear by, what's his name? He was the guy that wrote Guns, Germs, and Steel. I can't remember his name right now, but he tells the story about how, he spent a lot of time living with various indigenous cultures and seeing how they raise their children. And there's this story, I think he was in New Guinea, he was in a hut, talking with his family. And there's a little baby, 2 years old, on the floor. And he's playing with this knife, like a big, like butcher knife. And the kid was swinging it around and putting it in front of his face. And he's like trying to have a conversation with the parents of this kid who's on the floor playing with a sword. And he's like trying to talk to them, but like looking at this kid, like, do you see, like, and he obviously saw, like, okay, the parents see that this kid's playing with this knife, but like, do I say, like, should we stop this? He wasn't really sure. And anyway, so he's having this conversation, and at one point the baby drops the knife on the ground. And without breaking the conversation, the mother, who was talking to the author, bends down while she's still talking, doesn't even look at it, and gives the knife back to the baby and continues on the conversation. And so what he basically was saying is that in their cultures, there are lots of children or adults who have, it was very common to have scars on their face, because when they were babies, they crawled into fireplaces, or to have really bad cuts, because they played with sharp things. And basically, I'm not saying this is how you should raise your kids, but it's a different style of parenting. And you can see how, in today's kind of helicopter, where we can't let anybody get any hurt. Kids they have no bodily awareness. They have no concern. They have no responsibility. Like there's some happy medium here. There's some spectrum,
Right.
or some kind of ideal location that I think we should reach to have, true human thriving.
Right.
But
it's probably a good idea to just let your kids get into a little bit of trouble. My grandpa did that with my mom. He was sitting by the stove with a pot of boiling water, getting ready to cook something. And she came up and, dragged a stool over, and she was looking at the pot, and she like went to go put her hand in there, but stopped and looked at him, are you going to do anything? And he's like, what are you doing? And so she stuck her finger in there, and that's hot, And like having those natural consequences is really important sometimes to learning
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
lessons. But then you also want to make sure that your kids don't actually kill themselves. So where you find yourself on that spectrum,
Totally. But
it's a difficult, sort of gut reaction type of thing.
it
You
is.
gotta trust your mommy instincts.
It is, but and it comes back to that. Again, I think the proper role of government, taking a look at that child kind of parent role, is, raw milk is dangerous, so we're just going to make it illegal. Oh, marijuana is dangerous, we're going to make it illegal. You can't do that. And if you do it, we're going to put you in timeout. And it's like, again, like, do we own our own lives? Is it my life or is it your life? Who's the master and the slave? Am I a master over myself?
And I think that they have an answer to that in the fact that it's actually a crime to kill yourself.
Exactly. Yeah, which is just insane. And so I believe that the proper role for a parent and for the government is education. I shouldn't. No, that's actually not the case. It is to. This is another part of the objectivist philosophy, which I think is absolutely essential, is that they use fraud as a in the same way that, so it's force and fraud. The initiation of force or to lie, to mislead somebody deliberately, is wrong. And so the role of the government is there to stop force and fraud. And so basically it is the government shouldn't be involved in advertising or telling people what's safe and what isn't. I don't believe they should be doing that. What they should be doing is being an arbiter, so that if somebody says, hey, buy this product, it's great for you, it has all these things and it's totally safe, and then it turns out the thing isn't safe, the government should use the police to forcibly take that person and their products and make reparations for the damages that are done. That's the proper role of the government. The government shouldn't get involved in environmental protection agencies, because then they can be bought, which is what we're seeing today, and you get regulatory capture and all this other crap. And so basically the role of the government is, people have to be free to hurt themselves. And sometimes they're going to kill themselves, but that's a better alternative than creating a system where we're all slaves. And that's the way that I looking at.
It's almost a Darwinian approach.
It is, but the thing is, it's like the alternative is so awful, and there's no, like, where do you draw the line in the sand in terms of what is the proper role? And again, you see, like, anything that the government has gotten involvement, whether it's regulating automotive or cigarettes or alcohol or drugs, they make an absolute mess of everything, and it just makes it worse. It drives up the price of drugs. The governments are involved in black market drugs, all this crap. Coming back to this analogy of female genital mutilation in this situation, so you have this society of, basically, in my opinion, children playing with knives, except they're playing with knives around other children, and they're swinging it around, and they're potentially gonna hit somebody. But if we jump in and force them to reach our conclusions, basically, like, also, the way that we're running our society is right, the way that you're running it's wrong, and so we're going to forcibly stop you. That's what leads to, or can lead to, all kinds of extremism, and basically just doing it out of spite. What you see children do is they will, if you take a piece of candy or something that's going to rot their teeth, or they lose their minds, and they will go out of their way to like hurt themselves, they'll cut off their own, what's the saying? Cut off your own hand to spite your face.
Right, the nose. Cut off your nose.
Sorry. Cut off your nose to spite your face. Right, that's right. And so that's a real thing. And so I think that the correct thing is to, and this is like, how do we get out of this mess of a situation that we're in, where basically we have various versions of tyranny all over the world, whether it's actual dictatorships like China and North Korea, or basically democratic dictatorships like we have, like it's whichever government or whichever organization or union or victim group just votes in the government, that's who kind of gets all the power. The way out of this is to get a small group of people who understand the stuff that we're talking about. They don't feel guilty. They refuse to give moral sanction to anybody else. They are willing to use logic and reason and to discuss these principles out and to apply them. I believe that this kind of a society would thrive beyond all measures. It would be a beacon in the night to attract other people into it. People would want to take part. Who wouldn't want to be part of a situation where it's mutual consent to mutual benefit, and that the only relation, like, you will not be forced to do anything unless you want to do it. Of course, you aren't free to do, something else is going to hurt somebody else. That's the role of the police. That's just, of course, people would be attracted to that. And so you'd create this situation. In Rand's book, she builds one of these kind of fictional communities. She calls it Galt's Gulch. And it is a beacon that people flock to. And then you basically wait for the world to blow up. And you leave the so-called savages, or people who are, cutting off women's clitorises in the desert. You leave them to their own devices, and just let them burn themselves out as the dead end cultures that they are. And you don't give them aid. You don't participate in them. However, you can go in and, basically as a use logic and reason to try to bring people out of that culture into your world and convince them to join you. And at a certain point, there's a great quote from Thomas Sowell, which is, he basically said, races, people who are racist, like white slave owners in the South, they of course they prefer their own race to the race of others. Right? That's what a race, they prefer their own race to the race of others. But he says all racists prefer themselves to their own race. And so what he was getting at is just build a system where that people will see that, oh yeah, like, it's actually better for me to do this, to live this way. It's better for me to not have slaves, or to work with Black businesses or people who live differently than me, because it's going to benefit me. And because I live in a society where the government won't pick sides in terms of who's right, there's no advantage for me to try to buy the government or bribe them, and they'll intervene if I basically, like, you're stuck. Like, you're only free to harm yourself. And sadly, there might be some other people that are getting hurt, but you could easily walk through the country with, an armed caravan or something like that, and just basically say, here's the society that we're living in. Anybody who wants to join, come in here. We'll offer protection. And you could try to pull people out that way. But to go in and force a culture to come to your own conclusions is only going to lead to resentment and spite, and the kind of shit that we're seeing today, where even though it is better, they'll go to their graves with these dogmas, because they refuse to admit that they're wrong. And so that's kind of a long.
Well, and I mean, looking at it from an anthropological perspective, like you said, you mentioned that it's like a dead end culture, but how long has this been going on? Like, if it was really dead end, wouldn't it be dead?
Well,
but I think, I don't know if you're into sci-fi, but like Star Trek has that's what you're describing is basically the prime directive.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And it's, if you draw another analogy, like, let's take a look at the praying mantis. When a female and male praying mantis mate, some species will eat the male. Mm-hmm. This happens in spiders too. Mm-hmm. But there's not this, massive campaign by humans to, convert or eradicate all the praying mantis from their evil ways. In fact, we try to work with them. We use them as beneficial species. We attract them with some plants that they like to have in their space, because they are beneficial to us, and we're working with them. Like that seems to me kind of like an analogy of what you're trying to describe.
Yeah. Well, and to take it further is like in some of these cultures where, women are, forced to wear burqas, or they're forced to, submit to FGM or some of these other practices, these people have been, these women in particular have been brainwashed to feel like they deserve it. Like they have given their moral sanction to this system. And so like they're willing to be eaten, like the male praying mantis. And so I think we have the right to try to communicate about why this is wrong and to talk to them. But like if you rush in and you stop the person, with the knife, and then you take the other person away who's about to get cut, and you try to protect them both, you might actually create extremists on both ends where because you've violated their free will. And I would add that I've known a few Muslim women, and like for some women, the burqa it gives them humanity. Yeah.
They think that's how they feel about it, because then they're not seen as an object, they're seen as a person. I cover my hair and part of my face, so you hear my words instead of being distracted by, oh, she has beautiful hair, or look at her, it's reproductive organs, or and whatever the case may be.
And sure, that argument is fine, but it's like, okay, so like it's her words, so why won't you let her go to school?
Yeah, that's
right.
That's the other side of that. And even women who enjoy wearing the burqa still, like, is it Malala that she was fighting for girls to be able to go to school?
Yeah. And so that's like whether they're allowed or not allowed to go to school. Like this is another example. The FGM thing is I believe that it's wrong for us to force them to go to school, and it's wrong for them to be forced not to go to school. But us rushing in there and taking them away and putting them in classrooms is not going to, like, it's just another form of evil. And so like the correct way is mutual consent to mutual benefit. Use your words, try to educate them, lead by example, show them that there's a better way. And if they try to fuck with us, absolutely come down with a vengeance and stop the initiation of force. But people have to be free to harm themselves and to live in whatever misery and suffering or whatever it is. And this is the other side of Rand's philosophy that I love, is that we have no obligation to help them. None. This is our every single philosophical and religious system in the world is based on altruism, which is the belief that the only good in the world is to serve others, service to others versus service to self kind of stuff, or selfishness versus selflessness. Like that's kind of the false dichotomy. And it's, again, this is another tool that is used to create guilt and to get people. Again, if you were a dictator, wouldn't it be in your best interest to try to create a moral system that would convince people that they deserve to be ruled, and that they would all just rule each other, and they'd all sacrifice themselves to themselves, and that you would just be kind of this arbiter that would administer. It's a brilliant Machiavellian scheme to set up. And so I reject the whole notion of altruism. I believe that we have no obligation whatsoever to be involved in foreign aid or helping the children or whatever it is. It is our obligation is to our own self-interest, but we have no right to infringe on the self-interest of other people or other organisms. This is that interdependency. And so I know there's a lot of kind of complex things that we've talked about today, but I get really excited about these conversations, because in my opinion, nobody else is talking about this kind of stuff, or they're not applying these principles consistently across all levels, and they're giving themselves blank checks to do whatever they want here, but it's not okay here. And so again, just to finish up my one thought about the whole kind of land back and reconciliation and the reparations movement, which is like, okay, it was wrong for the colonization of America. Slavery was wrong. All these things were wrong. But if every single culture, including whites, have been enslaved by every possible combination of men oppressing women, women oppressing men, men, children, different races, every combination of possible human suffering has existed since humans have evolved from the previous hominids. And excuse me, if you read what's his name's book, it's called oh bugger, what's the name of his book? He talks about how basically humans, like Homo sapiens, basically raped and killed all the other hominid species for hundreds of thousands of years, and basically like we outbred and we killed or we literally raped the women of other hominid species to the point where we were the only one left. So like where do you draw the line? Like what was the Garden of Eden time in history when everything was perfect and like it's completely arbitrary? And of course there's all these different groups who are fighting to try to get the government to decide that, oh yeah, when our group back at this time period, that's when things were good, and so we should set everything back to that time scale, and we should give the law. Like it's only going to lead to more suffering. People have tried to do this before. It's not going to work, in my opinion. And so what do? We start today. We draw a line in the sand. We say, okay, shit that happened in the past is wrong. Let's start with a situation where there's mutual consent to mutual benefit. And that when
let's design the path where we can walk forward together. I think I heard you say that before.
Yeah, exactly. Let's design it together, and let's use that kind of veil of ignorance argument where, okay, how are we going to create a system that we would all draw names from the hat? So whether you're a billionaire or you're a bum on the street, you would be willing to participate in this game. And one of the things that I think needs to be abolished is, or at least we need to take a close look at it, is our laws around corporations. And for the example that we live in a society where you can buy the authority to do whatever you want. You can lobby the government. You can create a corporation that has private shareholders that nobody knows who they are, and you have all the benefit and you have no downside. And whenever
that's Citizens United here, the court ruling that basically said that corporations are people and they have the same voice as any person in the democracy.
Yep. Yeah. And so this is true. Let's make corporations people. And just like people, they're responsible for their actions. They have the same voice as a person. But if so, like everybody says, oh, it should be illegal to be a billionaire. I said, no, like people should be as free. I want to live in a society where a human is as free to rise as far as they wish, but they are not free to do it on the backs of other people.
Right.
And so like if Bezos
and on the back of the environment as well, like there's a big argument about all the plastic that's in the world, and why are corporations that produce and distribute the plastic not part of the conversation of what we do about this? Like how are they not responsible for something that they put out into the world?
Yeah, and so that's I'd have to think about that for a bit to see who's responsible there. But going back to the analogy of billionaires is like if we lived in a society, okay, so right now there's incredible inequality, for hundreds of years, people of color have been oppressed, all this stuff, sure there's and I think largely because of what the governments have done, there is aspects of so-called white privilege and things like that. Sure, I'll grant all those things, all the different versions of oppression. Okay, so going forward, then let's create a society where you can't buy yourself exemptions from laws. Everybody's held to the same standard. And if somebody accumulates a bunch of wealth and resources, they're responsible for that wealth and resources. And if those wealth and resources are used in a way that harms other people, the responsibility scales with it. Versus right now, if you get, there's certain check valves that if you get a certain level of wealth, there's nothing you can do you can buy the courts, you can file injunctions, you can run out the clock and bankrupt the people that are trying to sue you for the damages that you've done, and you can use the system to protect yourself. That should not be possible. We need a court system where it is fast, it is efficient, it is objective, and when you are proven, when your opponent is proven guilty and they've caused harm to you, they pay for your legal fees. These are just really simple things that would eliminate the kind of incentivized.
Well, and I mean, to a certain extent, the court system is that way insofar as that's how laws are written. But then there's just sort of this undercurrent of how it really works.
Yeah, exactly.
in
which
practice.
is
So, like, how do you
injunctions.
weed out that corruption? That's a really difficult question to answer.
But it's not. It's quite simple. It is remove the government from participating in the economy, and they will have no vested interest in creating laws that benefit corporations. It's like the way that the system is set up in the States. You can lobby the government to pass law. Like you can literally buy laws. Like that's how the system works. And so you can lobby the government to change the way. And this has been going on for 100 plus years now. But what set it off was this myth of authority, and that certain people have the right to exempt themselves from these core principles of voluntarism or mutual consent and mutual benefit, and everything goes off the rails. It's only a matter of time before you live in a tyrannical system. So yeah, I believe that's how we get out of this mess is to start incorporating some of these principles into our lives and applying it not just to humans but to all living organisms on this planet. And yeah, that's the way forward.
Yeah, well, and I mean, a long time ago in Greek culture, the way democracy began, serving in government was a position of service. That you didn't get any extra money for serving in that position. It was the responsibility to organize everybody, and it was totally different than it is right now.
Yeah, and I mean, there's like it's not to say that the government shouldn't be, like, services that they're providing shouldn't be compensated for. I think it is important that, but obviously, like the way that the system is right now, where in Canada, I believe if you serve 2 terms as a politician, which is like 8 years or maximum 8 years, is if you call elections. If you serve 2 years or 2 terms, you get a full pension. And so the whole system is set up. Basically, there's all these business students that go into politics. They serve 8 years. They create all of these laws that are an absolute rat's nest to navigate. Once they finish their 8 years, they have a full government pension, and then they go work in the private industries, helping corporations navigate the rat's nest of laws that they helped create, because they're the only people that know how the systems work. And this is literally what's happening. And so, but like the difference is, and this is like, is that like, there's all these conversations about how do we get out of this mess. And everybody's just, in my opinion, rearranging deck. I use this analogy in our conversation. Everybody's rearranging deck chairs in the Titanic. And there's, should we have liberals or conservatives? Should we be on the left side of the Titanic when it goes down, or should we be on the right side of the Titanic? Nobody's addressing the gaping hole in the hull that has been getting wider and wider, basically since the inception of our countries. And yes, things have been getting progressively less tyrannical in that, we used to be ruled by, chieftains. Then there was, priests and shamans, and then there was kings and the divine right of kings. And then there was, so we are slowly moving away from that. But I believe, like, let's just take it to its final conclusion. As Rand said, the smallest minority in the world is the individual. And individual rights are the only rights we need to focus on. We don't need women's rights or gay rights or any of the other things. We have individual rights. And that covers everything else. So
And it makes us all equal.
makes
too.
us all equal, but the same thing is applied to all organisms, but the reason is, well, for why do we do this is because to not do it is a contradiction, and you create a situation where somebody with a bigger stick is going to come along someday, and they're going to, all these people clamoring for the various socialist groups that are, trying to take over the government right now. It's only a matter of time before somebody who's more tyrannical than you is going to come in and take over. And so it's in our own best interest, even for these, psychopaths and tyrannical people, to build a society where the kind of principles we've been talking about here today are sacred and enshrined, and that we feel confident to talk about them and not feel guilty. And so, I mean, that was a lot of ground to cover, since like chickens in the backyard to how to, redesign the governmental system of the world. But in my opinion, I think it's a compelling example of how to apply these principles from that small microcosm in your backyard, on a farm, in a community, all the way up to the government, and it all integrates together. There's no contradictions, and it still provides tons of room for evolution and adaptation and things like that. But if we lose those things, it's a slippery slope. And one of the analogies that I gave is like the funny thing about that environmentalist group, which was probably vegan, was probably PETA funded or something like that threatened to sue this your city for not doing an environmental law, is that like the whole thing is a witch hunt. All these people are you're a witch, you're a witch, you're a witch. The problem with a witch hunt is that if you're not calling everybody else a witch, like, then you're a witch. And so like you're eventually going to be kind of burned by a mob of your own making. And so these same people who used the environmental laws to at the point of a gun, to not use logic and reason, but to use the machinery of the state to stop somebody from engaging in mutual consent to mutual benefit, that's going to come back and bite them in the ass. And someday somebody else is going to say, you can't grow a garden in your front yard. You can't have a clothesline in your front yard. And they're going to make up some trumped up charges about how it damages their estate. And so we're not going to have property rights. We're not going to have any. It's a race to the bottom. And
so the core principle is mutual consent for mutual benefit. That's how you create a government that doesn't open the door for the next dictator to
Yep.
You take a system that you built with good intention and turn it around and enslave people, essentially.
Exactly. And so it's a slippery slope. It's a snowball effect. And there's all these details and things that are getting wrapped up. I'll give you one more example that just drives me nuts right now, and nobody else is talking about it. It's to do with the vaccine mandates, and so or mask mandates or whatever it is. And so this is a fantastic example of why the government should not be involved in this thing, but both sides of the argument are wrong. And so there are people who say there's private businesses, and the government is saying, okay, they're saying to these private businesses, if you don't do these certain things, if you don't force vaccinations, if you don't force mask mandates, then we're going to fine you. And then the businesses are going to their customers, and they're saying, okay, like, in order to enter into our private business, these are the things that you must do. And so there's a bunch of people who are like the people who are pro-mask and pro-vaccine. They're wanting the government to do more and more and more, and do it for all the businesses. Take away everything, force them. You lock up these people that don't want to get vaccinated, put them in camps. They're dangerous, and of course they fail to realize that, okay, well, if the vaccine works, then we're not dangerous to you, and if it doesn't work, then why are you getting it? And all these other contradictions. But the people who don't want to get vaccinated and don't want to wear masks, when they come into a private business, I say, I'm not wearing a mask. and you know, it's an infringement of my rights to force you to force me to wear a mask in your business. And so I'm just going to come in, and they're all arrogant. And I've, you know, sadly, I have kind of friends and colleagues I've talked to about this, but they're still doing it. You know, they'll go on an airplane and do a selfie video of themselves, you know, eating food on a plane without wearing a mask. And like a flight attendant and all the people around them are like, "Sir, please put on your mask." Well, I don't have to wear masks. You know, it bothers me. I don't want, and they're taking a video of themselves like a jackass. And the thing is, like, they are negating the only, by their action, they are negating the very thing that they're trying to protect, which is individual rights. So again, this is mutual consent to mutual benefit. You're on private property. It's their plane, it's their business. They can dictate whatever terms they want for you to enter into their private business. And if they can't do that, then you have no right to do it either. And so if you don't like it, walk. If you don't like it, don't go to that store. But the slippery slope is the governments will get involved. And there are cases like this. And this is a very nuanced argument. There have been lots of cases where certain businesses refuse to serve certain people, whether it's homosexuals, whether it's Blacks, whether it's women, whether it's
we actually had a case of that here where a bakery wouldn't make a cake for a gay couple.
Exactly, right. And and that's wrong. It is wrong for somebody to discriminate in that way. However, it is more wrong for the government to come in and force that individual to do it. And
right.
so,
well, and there are natural consequences to that. You know, a lot of people are saying boycott this business. A lot of people are saying, yes, these people have our values, and let's go shop there. You know,
exactly. And so let them do that. But as soon as the government takes a side and they start forcing people to do things against their own judgment, even if it is, and it's the same thing for, you know, the you know, people, you know, savages that are cutting off the clitorises of females. If you force them to do what's right, you open the door for your own destruction. And so, okay, so the government decided that it's wrong for a business to not be able to decide who comes in the front door. What makes them say that they can't say, okay, well, you have to give out free stuff to everybody that comes in your door, or like it stops being private property. So yes, it is wrong, but if they're not hurting anybody, which they're not, it's wrong, and it's
immoral, but not there's no bodily harm involved.
Yeah, and it's the baby with the knife situation. It's like it's worse to take it away from it than to kind of let it go, as long as it's not at risk of kind of hurting anybody else. And so
we've been talking for a while, so like I don't want to go too far into it, but like I would say the other side of that is, you know, when you have a society where everybody says, no, I'm not going to make the wedding cake for your gay marriage, then it starts to feel like I'm the person in the wrong, I'm unacceptable, and then some people go from there to being suicidal. So there is the potential for bodily harm. But as long as the government, so individuals have no right to initiate force against somebody else. So they're free to self-organize, but the danger is when the government gets involved and says, you have to do this. And they start saying, this is the science. We've decided that this is what's right. And nobody else is free to choose or have a conversation anymore. Because once that happens, you have regulatory capture. And so today it's the vaccine. Tomorrow it might be what your children are getting taught. It might be what food you're allowed to eat. It might be how much energy you're allowed to use with carbon credits. And this is happening if you do research into this stuff. It is happening. I mean, we homeschool, and I know for a fact, like the state requires us to do, it's mandatory testing, even though we're homeschool, you know. And that's there's actually a ton of evidence to suggest that those tests have no educational benefit and they have educational detriment.
Exactly.
So, but you're still forced to participate in that situation if you live in this state.
Exactly. But even worse is that the state uses the education system to indoctrinate children into being more pro-state. And so just it enlarges this whole system. And so like coming back to the taxation thing just for a moment, I think this would be a good place to stop. It's like, Okay, so somebody wants to, somebody thinks that everybody should have schooling, or that nobody should go to bed hungry, or that it's wrong for this particular injustice to happen. Great. You should organize people to stop it. You should use logic and reason and mutual consent to mutual benefit. Get people to realize why it's in their best interest to do what you're saying. But instead, what people do is they get a petition together, they go to the government, and they say, hey, you should pass a law to make it mandatory to do the thing that we're trying to do. And that's wrong. Because they're using force.
Right. Petitioning should be used to remove barriers rather than place them up.
Or like using it to self-organization, or so that this is another flip side, we should use petitions to remove barriers. That's like asking permission to not be a slave. Like that's a moral sanction. So I don't participate. I don't do surveys. I don't do petitions. I don't do marches. I don't ask for the government to stop to give me back my freedom. The government has no right to take my freedom from me. I live in a dictatorship. I know that I am being oppressed, but I'll be damned if I'm going to ask for my rights back. I'm going to act in a way as if I have them. And when the government tries to assert itself, I will use civil disobedience as a way to try to take things to the top to show that it's wrong. And so it's a very subtle thing, but like a lot of these people are going to rallies. Let us not wear masks. Let us not wear masks. You're literally asking for permission. And then those same people, they go into other businesses and they say, we're not going to wear a mask. We're not going to wear a mask. It's so you have the right to your body, but they don't have the right to theirs. You have no ground to stand on. And so, but if you apply it consistently across the whole thing, it's simple. Oh, anyways, that was a good, it was. 2.5 hours.
Went a little bit longer than I expected it to, but every minute of it was enjoyable. I really want to thank you for letting me do this with you.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. And yeah, thanks for reaching out and being willing to kind of recreate the conversation we had the other day. Like I said, for folks who are listening at home or on the road, I really hope that you guys got some value out of this, and I encourage you to do more resources, or to research more resources. There's a ton of information out there, but also to think for yourself, and like don't take what I'm saying as, oh, this is true because Takota said it.
Because Takota said it.
Yes, no. Like it's mutual consent to mutual benefit. Actually, like think about these things through, try to apply them to your own life, understand them, and do more research. And when you, upon your own, free will, come to these conclusions, then start talking about it to other people. But really take the time. I've read, I think, just about almost every book that Rand's written 2 or 3 times now, and I've had probably hundreds of hours of conversations like this, to the point where I feel like I can actually articulate, and even some of the things that I talked about, some of the things I disagree with Rand on, and how she was applying her principles inconsistently with, basically going in and forcing certain cultures to conform to what we say, and how. Yeah, don't be dogmatic about this. Think it through, and most importantly, have fun. This is and enjoy it. This is I love this kind of stuff. I think this is how the world's going to get better. And yeah, I can't wait to see what folks think of our conversation.
At least I have no reputation to lose.
Oh, that's things I don't either. This is I believe this. I'm convicted, and I'm willing to go toe to toe. And if I'm wrong, great. Prove why I'm wrong. Let's have a discussion about why I'm wrong. Because if I am, we both benefit. I'll benefit too. So I'm more than happy to have these conversations. You weren't really pushing back, but I've had some very heated discussions about. I'm sure there's people in there that are just going to be shaking with rage about some of the thing. Well, that you're sure that all makes sense.
Maybe I wasn't pushing back, but I was trying to present alternative, perspectives,
no,
and then hear your thoughts on that.
Totally. And it's not to say that you like some people, they will hear this and they will be livid with like, how dare you, not say that land needs to go back? How dare you say that it's okay for a business owner to not decide whether or not he's going to allow people with masks into a store, or that it's okay for a business to not let, to not serve a gay couple? Like, that's wrong. The government must, and all these other things that make sense, but the government has to force this person to do this right thing. It's like, all right, like if you let that in, where do you draw the line? Where do you stop it? Mm-hmm. And so it be, and the other one is particularly within the permaculture movement is the environmental movement. A lot of these environmental regulations and save the planet stuff, it is being used as a battering ram to accomplish an agenda that I believe some these politicians in tyrannical positions are using to as to get us to give moral sanction and as a kind of a false alternative to accomplish some of these things. And so really think about this stuff. It's important stuff. And yeah.
So it sounds like we could have a whole bunch more conversations, because I keep thinking of things to come back at you.
Yeah. Well, you bet. Well, if there's a good response to this and we've got more conversations, I'm more than happy to continue the conversation. But we'll throw it out there and see what folks think. And likewise, if people are listening, they have engaging questions or comments. In the past, most of the podcasts have been
the student panel.
Yeah, but in the past, most of the conversations I've been having have been me interviewing other people on the podcast. But I really like this format, and so I'm happy to if there's another topic that somebody else in the audience is like really passionate about and they want to do something like this on, I'm more than happy to have
phone in.
have a discussion about it. And so that we can share this out to some broader audiences. So anyways, Tasha, thank you so much for being willing it takes a lot of courage to get into this. I know when I first started speaking in public and stuff, it just made my knees jitter, and so I
thankfully I'm sitting down.
Yeah, you did awesome. And I look forward to future combos.
Yeah, I really appreciate you having me on. It was great.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Take care.
You too.